All right, buckle up for this one. Today, we're going deep on a case that's, well, it's truly chilling.
It's one of those cases that really sticks with you.
Yeah, it's Karl Denker, a German serial killer from the 1920s. And when you hear serial killer, you might think, oh, another one. But this one's different.
Denker. He's known as the Forgotten Cannibal. And there's a reason for that.
Okay, Forgotten Cannibal, I'm already hooked. Give me the rundown. Like,
Yeah.
what makes this case stand out from all the other, terrible true crime stories?
I think it's how Denker was able to operate undetected for over 2 decades.
2 decades? That's insane. How is that even possible?
Well, that's part of what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're going to look at Germany in the aftermath of World War I. We're talking about a society in chaos, economic hardship, a lot of disillusionment.
Okay, yeah, post-World War I Germany, definitely a tumultuous time. And I guess in all that turmoil, some things could slip through the cracks.
Exactly. And Denker, he knew how to exploit those cracks. See, this wasn't just about the killings. It was about how he was able to blend in, appear normal, respectable even, for years.
So paint a picture for me. What was Germany like in the 1920s?
Imagine a country devastated by war. People are struggling, jobs are scarce.
So people are desperate.
Right. And a lot of people become what they called back then wandering workers.
Yeah.
Essentially people traveling around looking for any kind of work.
So they're vulnerable, isolated.
And easy to overlook.
And that's where Denker comes in.
Denker preyed on these individuals, people who, if they disappeared, wouldn't cause too much of a stir.
Wow. So let's talk about Denker himself. What was his deal?
So in his community of Musterberg, he was known as Father Denker.
Father Denker, like a kindly old man.
Exactly. He was seen as harmless, even generous, always helping out, giving gifts to neighbors.
So the classic wolf in sheep's clothing. But there had to be something, right? Some signs.
There were hints, for sure. Like, Denker had a huge appetite, especially for meat. And his views on women were, let's just say, pretty backward.
I see. Those are some red flags.
Yeah, but people dismissed them as eccentricities.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's just a quirky old guy.
So how did this whole charade, how did it finally crumble?
It started with a wandering worker named Vincent Olivier. He went to Denker's door looking for help.
Okay, and I'm guessing this help didn't involve, like, a warm meal and a place to stay, right?
Not quite. Denker invited him in, and then, bam, attacked him with a pickaxe.
A pickaxe? Wow, that escalated quickly.
Luckily, some neighbors heard the commotion and called the police.
Okay, so at this point, the jig is up, right?
Well, yeah, you'd think so.
Hmm.
But hold on. It gets even
Well,
crazier.
I'm sure it does. What happened?
Initially, the police didn't really believe Vincent's.
Because of Denker's good guy reputation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then Denker, well, he did something that changed everything.
I have a bad feeling about this.
He committed suicide in his cell.
And I bet that's when they found all the evidence.
Bingo! They started going through his apartment. And let's just say they uncovered a whole lot more than they bargained for.
This is the part where I get both curious and a little queasy, isn't it?
It's the part where Father Denker, the harmless old man, disappears completely.
So what did they find? Lay it on me.
Cooked human flesh, jars full of teeth, clothes made from human skin.
Oh, God.
It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. And it was only the beginning.
Only the beginning. There's more.
Oh, yeah. This wasn't just a one-off thing. Denker had been at it for a long, long time.
Okay, so how many victims are we talking about here?
Well, they found hundreds of bones, over 350 human teeth. They believe he killed at least 25 people over a span of 21 years.
21 years, and he kept records. What, like a diary?
Even worse, he had lists of victims, dates, what he calls slaughter weights, detailed notes on how he prepared the flesh. Meticulous, horrifying.
So he was documenting his crimes like it was some kind of recipe book.
And you know what? Those records, they ended up playing a key role in another twist in this whole case.
Another twist.
Remember I said Denker was the forgotten cannibal? Well, part of that is because another cannibal, Fritz Hermann, was operating around the same time. He was much more flamboyant, got a lot more attention.
Okay, so Denker was overshadowed by this other guy.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. There was this guy, Edward Troutman, a butcher, who got convicted of murdering a woman named Emma Sander back in 1909.
Okay, but how does this tie into Denker?
Well, among Denker's records was a woman named Ida, killed on the same date as Emma Sander. And remember those clothes made from human skin? One of them had a patch that matched the missing skin from Emma Sander's leg.
So Denker's records actually exonerated an innocent man.
It's a bizarre kind of justice, isn't it? but it really makes you wonder how many other cases Denker might be connected to.
That's what we're going to dig into next time. So we ended on this really unsettling note, all these wandering workers just disappearing. Do you think Denka specifically targeted them, or was it more like a crime of opportunity, like he just took advantage of whoever was around?
It's a good question. And, at first glance, it might seem like he was just taking advantage of a vulnerable population. But when you really dig into it, I think there was a more deliberate strategy at play.
So you're saying he specifically sought out these wandering workers. Why? What was the advantage there?
Think about it. These were men who were passing through, no real ties to the community.
So if they vanished, no one would really notice.
Exactly. And even if someone did notice, who would advocate for them?
Yeah.
Who would push for a real investigation?
They were basically invisible, perfect victims for someone like Denka. And all of this happening against the backdrop of post-war Germany. The country's trying to rebuild. People are struggling to get by.
Right. It's a society focused on survival, on getting back on its feet. In all that chaos, it's easy to see how these disappearances could go unnoticed.
So Denka was exploiting not just the vulnerability of his victims, but the vulnerability of society itself. It's a really disturbing thought, but it kind of makes sense.
And then you add in the fact that Denker had this carefully crafted persona, this Father Denker image.
The kindly old man, yeah. It's almost like a disguise, a way to deflect suspicion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He created this image of himself as a harmless, even helpful member of the community, and it worked. For years, he was able to operate under the radar because no one suspected a thing.
It's incredible and terrifying. I mean, how did he pull it off for so long? Were there no signs, no suspicions at all?
Oh, there were signs, whispers of strange behavior, but they were always explained away, dismissed. Like neighbors would see Denker carrying these large packages into his home, but he'd always come out empty-handed.
And what about the smell? I mean, surely there must have been something.
There were definitely reports of a foul odor coming from his apartment.
And what did people think it was?
People just assumed it was, I don't know, maybe he had a plumbing problem or something.
It's crazy how people can rationalize things away, especially when it comes to someone they trust. What about sounds? Did anyone ever hear anything suspicious coming from his place?
Oh, yeah. There were accounts of people hearing sawing and chopping noises late at night. But again, it was always explained away. Oh, he's just working on some furniture, they'd say. Or maybe he's got a hobby.
It's amazing how easily people can be fooled, especially when they want to believe the best in someone. But eventually, the truth has to come out. So how did it all unravel for Denka?
Well, like we said, it started with the attack on Vincent Olivier. That was the first real crack in Denker's facade. But even then, it took his suicide for the full horror of his crimes to be revealed.
So we've established that Denka was meticulous in his planning, deliberate in his choice of victims, and masterful at concealing his true nature. But the big question that remains is, why? What drove him to do these things?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. There's no single factor that can fully explain what drives someone to become a serial killer. But we can look for clues. We can examine Denker's past, his psychology, the social context of his time.
Okay, so let's start with his past. What do we know about Denka's early life? Were there any red flags there? Anything that might hint at the darkness that was to come?
Well, according to his family, Denker was a quiet child, very withdrawn. There are also accounts of him being fascinated by the novel Robinson Crusoe.
Robinson Crusoe? What, like the whole deserted island thing?
Yes, but specifically the passages that deal with cannibalism.
Wow, that's a pretty disturbing detail. It almost makes you wonder if those stories planted a seed in his mind, you know? Like a twisted fascination that later manifested in his actions.
It's certainly a possibility. We also know that Denker had a difficult childhood. He grew up in poverty. There was a lack of emotional connection. It's possible those early experiences contributed to his feelings of isolation and detachment.
So a troubled childhood, a fascination with stories of cannibalism, and then you layer on top of that the societal upheaval of post-war Germany. It's like a perfect storm, creating the conditions for something truly horrific to take root and grow.
It's a chilling thought, but I think you're right. It's a reminder that these cases are never simple. They're always a complex interplay of individual psychology and societal forces. And that's what makes them so fascinating and so disturbing to study.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me in all of this is the record keeping. Like, Denka documented everything, right down to what he called the slaughter weights of his victims.
It's chilling, isn't it? It's almost like he was treating his crimes like some kind of scientific experiment.
Yeah, it's like he was trying to bring some kind of order to the chaos. But it also makes you wonder, like, Why? Why document it all so meticulously?
Some experts believe it's about control. It's a way for the killer to exert power over the situation.
To make it more real, more tangible.
Maybe. Or maybe it's a way to distance themselves from the horror of what they're doing.
It's like they're creating a narrative, a story that they can control. And in Denker's case, his narrative ended up having a really unexpected impact.
You're talking about Edward Troutman, the butcher who was wrongfully convicted.
Yeah, I mean, it's a twisted kind of justice, right? Denker's meticulousness, as horrifying as it was, actually helped exonerate an innocent man.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? But it also raises a really important question about how we as a society respond to these kinds of cases.
William,
Well, Denko was able to operate undetected for so long because people either didn't see the warning signs or chose to ignore them.
you're right. Like those reports of a foul smell coming from his apartment, the strange packages, the late night noises, those were all red flags.
And yet people either dismissed them or came up with rational explanations.
Because he was Father Denker, the kindly old man, it's easier to believe the good than to confront the possibility of evil, especially when it comes from someone you think you know.
It's like we have this blind spot when it comes to people who seem harmless. And that blind spot can have devastating consequences.
So, what can we do? How can we be more aware of these warning signs? How can we prevent something like this from happening again?
I think it starts with being willing to question our assumptions
About people, about situations.
about everything. We have to be willing to see the world as it is, not as we want it to be. And we have to be willing to speak up when something feels wrong, even if it means challenging the status quo.
It's about being vigilant, about looking out for each other, especially those who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. Denka's victims were largely marginalized individuals, their disappearances easily overlooked. We need to create a society where everyone feels seen and heard, where even the smallest red flag is taken seriously.
It's a tall order, but it's the only way to honor the memory of those who suffered at the hands of people like Denka.
And it's the only way to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating and disturbing deep dive into the case of Karl Denker, the forgotten cannibal.
It's a case that forces us to confront the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives.
And it's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be aware, to be vigilant, and to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. Thanks for joining us on this journey.